Hey everyone, this is Devin from Hellscube. Last time, we talked a lot about how Hellscards deal with complex effects, nested cards, and how to convey those effects to a player effectively. Additionally, we looked at all those cards within the lens of the core three: resonance, innovation, and grokkability. Once again today, we'll be taking a bit of a left turn. Today, we'll be looking at cards that have mastered the art of simplicity. Simplicity, in contrast to complexity, is difficult to nail. You have less opportunities for resonance and innovation, and while grokkability is usually greatly increased, the effort a designer has to put in to make something simple pop is monumental. And the funny thing is, despite what I said, simple cards might be the easiest thing a designer will ever make. This paradox strikes at the core of humor, the key element of a successful Hell's card. You see, humor, in order to be effective, needs to be effortless, or failing that, extremely confident. With a simple card, you're often conveying one idea extremely well, a sharp punchline to a short joke. So, the cards we spoke about last time were all funny, but their strengths relied on the dance and interplay of their elements. In contrast, the cards today have to lean into their theming and readability to succeed. I can't tell you how to be funny, but I can show you how to recognize the little details that make these cards work. So let's get into it. First up, in the original Hellscube, we have 4 of Hearts. Shaped like a 4 of Hearts playing card, it is a 4/4 red playing card creature that costs 3 generic and 1 red mana. Its only ability is lifelink. Now, for resonance, it should be pretty clear. This is taking a 4 of Hearts and using its natural theming to construct a French vanilla creature. Something this card does well is maintaining the structure of the playing card to accentuate the resonance, using sparing and small Magic the Gathering elements to keep the flow. Seeing this card in a pack, for instance, may confuse your brain for a moment. Wait, is this a poker card? The humor here comes from the card's unflinching adherence to being a 4 of Hearts. The stats are not phenomenal, but it's a 4 of Hearts. The cost is not phenomenal, but it's a 4 of Hearts. All it has is lifelink, but it's a 4 of Hearts. The confident and simple expression of a playing card is the cornerstone that this card presents. That's not to say that this card has no innovation either. Rather than mechanical innovation, formatting innovation is where this card succeeds. Taking a card from another game is something you'll see a lot in Hellscube. And the way 4 of Hearts treats this is something that sets a great precedent going forward. This card retains as much of its original identity as possible, but utilizes MTG visuals to convey the relevant MTG information. The cost, the type line, the keyword, all ripped from a Magic card. While there's a lot of temptation to keep things diegetic, that is, to keep all the relevant card information grounded in the fantasy of the card, the way this card confidently pastes on Magic blocks like it's a magpie cube sells the proud amateur core of Hellscube, making you wonder how many other cards from other games can you translate so effectively. Finally, for grokkability, this card uses a lot of techniques I spoke on before. It keeps the cost in the top right, the type line and rules text towards the middle, and even the power and toughness on the bottom right as well. The fun thing is the reversibility of this card. The cost and power and toughness are flipped to retain the theming on their opposite corners, while also having the power and toughness become the name, typically on the top left. This utilizes its space well, letting the negative space of the card pull a lot of the flow of how it reads. Overall, simple cards like this lend themselves to good grokkability, with the lowered complexity meaning there's a lot less hoops to jump through to make people understand how the card works. Going into Hellscube 2, we're going to be talking about quite the iconic card, Clockwolf. This card is a 6/6 green and white wolf creature, even if you can't quite make out the type line behind them, it's in the name, that costs a hybrid 1 generic 1 green, 1 green mana, another hybrid, but this time it's 1 generic and 1 white, and then 1 white mana. Other than that, no abilities. To really understand why this card exists, we must first turn to its source, Watchwolf. Watchwolf is a 2 mana 3/3 vanilla creature. By contrast, Clockwolf is a 4 mana 6/6 vanilla creature. So it's just a big Watchwolf. The resonance here is equally about how it's a big Watchwolf and how confidently it sells itself. The original flavor text of Watch Wolf talks about the wolves watching the flock, while the flavor text here is a play on the who watches the watchers saying. The implication that just a twice as big wolf oversees the watch wolves, while just being a bigger timepiece in the name, is just a wonderfully silly joke. Just stretching the art with low resolution, jagged image of Watch Wolf really evokes the frivolous humor of the 2000s, the almost kinetic sense that this wolf is approaching you through the frame to watch you is a phenomenal way to turn a vanilla card that much more special. All of the small visual details here really harmonize and cement how it has shaped Hellscube's humor since its acceptance. And you might think I won't have a lot to say on innovation, and you'd be right. That said, I do have something to point out. The near pointlessness of the one brid costs is a great way to maintain a tether to the additional card. Watch Wolf just costs 1 green and 1 white. Since Hellscube is a draft environment, putting in 4 specific color pips to get a vanilla 6/6 isn't an ideal option, so no just doubling the Watch Wolf cost. Instead, this card lets the one brid retain the theming and playability, while also consequently giving Clockwolf a bit of identity on its own. The one brid on this card has basically become its legacy. Finally, for grokkability, the funny thing is that this card blocks a lot of text, yet it still shows you just enough for you to fill in the rest yourself. For creature, it just cuts off the E. For wolf, it leaves the L and F to inform you it's just a wolf, as per the name. Finally, it just shows just enough of the flavor text for you to be able to easily fill the blanks yourself. This is how text cover-ups should really work, only covering up things that are easily filled in by the player without room for ambiguity, and especially not core functionality elements. Next up, in Hellscube 3, we have Shadow, or, well, if you're reading this for the first time, a card with no name. It's a 2/2 black hedgehog creature that costs 1 generic mana and 1 black mana, with its only ability being Shadow. Now, with the name line empty and it only having a single word in the rules text and it depicting Shadow the Hedgehog, it's pretty clear that this card is named Shadow. The resonance here is something interesting. I think the pose and the art is what really sells it to me. It's the confident edginess that Shadow himself exudes that accentuates the way the card works. Rather than leaning into the DeviantArt style of edginess, it more so embodies the pithy one-liners and quietness of standard anti-hero types. Something fun to note is that Shadow as a mechanic, I feel, works well with Shadow the Hedgehog as a baseline, giving you a sense of otherworldly speed the base character has, despite how often he just stands there and huffs in a game. With innovation, you might think the innovation here is the empty name box. However, this was done before all the way back in Hellscube 1. What this card nails is keeping it simple. By utilizing a combat keyword, it can keep the name and rules text completely lined up without jumbling the theming. In fact, many later cards follow in Shadow's footsteps rather than prior examples, keeping the presentation as clean as possible. That said, it's very rare to run into something that so perfectly fits a very recognizable character and a magic keyword. If you find one, you have a great template to follow with this card. For grokkability, the fun thing about this card is the reading flow. You start at the top, seeing a blank name line, and then, your eyes start to drift to the art, and you go, oh, it's Shadow, I guess. Then you read the rules box and go, oh, the name is also Shadow. It gives you the vibes of a common Hellscube joke. You know what to fucking do, where it insists that you follow your gut on missing card information. This type of confidence can enhance the joke and readability, but it's easy to miss here. Cards like this have a lot of room to be misinterpreted if the theming isn't spot on, like this card does. Now, in Hellscube 4, we're going to drift away from vanilla and French vanilla creatures with Puerto Rican. As a reminder, HC4 is a very high power vintage cube, so don't be too floored by the power level. Puerto Rican is a 4/3 white human creature that costs 2 generic and 1 white mana with the ability Puerto Rican isn't affected by state-based actions. Where to begin? The resonance here is insane. Such a simple yet wacky line of rules text captures the political reality of Puerto Rico. It's a territory in the United States of America, meaning its citizens are considered U.S. citizens, but are exempt from federal taxes and cannot participate in federal elections. The territory also doesn't have a seat in Congress, leaving it a bit stranded in both effects of being independent from the state or fully integrated into them. The territory has had a large majority in favor of being an American state, yet it still remains a territory that is subject to all U.S. federal laws with no statehood or representation to its name. All this bundled up in one little sentence that talks about niche Magic the Gathering rules. Things like this are where Hellscube cards get to shine, showing how an elegant card design like this can so accurately blend MTG rules jargon with resonant real-life situations. I would hedge a pretty comfortable bet that while I was yapping about Puerto Rico's political situation, you were wondering how this card even functions. There are a lot of state-based actions, though much less that apply to specifically creatures. The effects that apply to it include not being affected by sectors due to a space sculptor effect, not ceasing to exist if it's a token or a copy in an inappropriate zone, +1/+1 and -1/-1 counters on it not annihilating each other, and most notably, not being moved to the graveyard if its toughness is reduced to 0 or less, receiving damage equal to or greater than its toughness, or receiving damage from a source with Death Touch. Basically, this renders it unable to die, barring any destroy or sacrifice effects, a weird form of indestructible. This, in practice, functions pretty simply. Damage and -N effects don't kill Puerto Rican. Most of the other state-based actions barely apply to this card. By restricting the rules text to just this flavorful line, it means it's not a big hassle to look up the nicheness of what this card mentions while still introducing Hell's wackiness. Now for Grockability, this card doesn't do much special, so I won't dwell on it long. Instead, I think this card could have possibly used some very small reminder text on the relevant state-based actions this is immune to, but still, the very clean presentation lends itself well to being an easy read. Moving forward to Hellscube 6, we're back to ransom noting with Alenda the Blenda. Now, again, a reminder that this is for Commander Cube, so it comes with extra expectations on function. Alenda the Blenda is a legendary 1/1 white and black vampire knight creature that costs 1 white mana and 1 black mana to cast with lifelink, and whenever another creature dies, put it on Alenda. They mutate. As I spoke on during my first Frame the Masterpieces, ransom noting as a technique plays into resonance well. By minimally displacing the original, a designer can rely on the knowledge of the original card to inform the player on the intended through line. With Alenda, this is an edited version of the actual source card, Alenda the Dusk Rose, and utilizes the growing through death theme of Alenda. Now, the big difference between the two is that the growth on Alenda the Blenda isn't as linear as the original. Erasing a large portion of the original text and only adding 2 words, the fantasy shift from an ancient vampire knight to a woman who is more blender than person is an easy one. These types of ransom notes, where the added text is relatively minimal, tend to be quite successful, though notably they are very finicky to balance. The resonance of the source card is very important to the ransom note version, so any changes have to be still in line with the original to retain design parity, or else it risks throwing off the aesthetics completely. As far as innovation, as with other cards of HC6 I've mentioned, this card leverages the 4-player format of Commander uniquely well. Normal Alenda can get quite large, but rarely interesting. A big lifelink that makes a bunch of little vampires when it dies is fine, but it's a pretty standard style of effect. What Blenda does well is provoke the mind on what cool stuff you can assemble from not only your things, but also your opponent's stuff. When a creature dies, it doesn't necessarily even buff Blenda, but it does provide it more and more value and compounding abilities at minimum. This type of commander that really makes you conscious of your deck building choices. And it's also the type of commander that gets your opponents involved with your board in a way that makes them rethink how they attack, block, and utilize removal. Lastly, with Grockability, I like to call out something with this ransom note that I think it excels at. A lot of ransom notes are, for lack of a better term, cobbled together. Most of the time it really aids in the humor, but at times it can be at the cost of easy reading. This card makes very clean ransom noting, with the excised parts of Alenda's rules box being basically seamless, with the only extremely noticeable ransom noting being in the name and flavor text, as well as the fragment added in for the mutation. This card makes for an easy read, and a large swath of empty rules box still lets you know that the card has in fact been ransom noted, despite the lack of visible edits. just a really clean way to modify a card. By the way, if you haven't noticed, the generic mana pip is very expertly removed without a trace. Okay, so before I get to Hellscube 7, I'm going to take a bit of a detour to something not in a main cube. I'll be stopping at HCC, which is the collection of cut commanders from HC6. These commander slots in 6 were voted on after they were already accepted, meaning that some of the cards got cut from the main cube and put in a still Hellsmander legal set, but not in a draftable HC6. Some great designs ended up here, but one in particular fits today's theme. We'll be looking at Archimedes. Archimedes is a legendary 1/4 blue human scientist creature that costs 2 generic and 1 blue mana with, when Archimedes enters, discover Pi. Now, I won't be talking about Archimedes in the sense of being a commander, due to not being draftable in the commander cube, but instead as just a Hells card. Archimedes has such a clean resonance, with Archimedes the person being the first known scientist to have an approximation of Pi all mathed out. I think the illustration really sells it for me. The disheveled, nearly suggestive expression giving the impression of, yeah, you know what I did. The simple and normal Magic card presentation of a relatively simple effect really leverages the idea of just being Archimedes. No other jokes needed to sell it. Innovation-wise, this smartly uses Pi as a way to simply just discover 3, as it's nearly functionally identical, barring the elusive card that costs Pi to cast. This allows you to put a funny coat of paint over a mundane action using a mathese term that most people still can understand. With the simplicity of the card, though, that's about the depth of innovation it has to offer. The grok ability is similarly not the main point of the card. It's just a simple joke, told with a simple card done well. It reads just as a Magic card should, which not every joke can sustain. Personally, out of all the cards I'm talking about today, I think this distills simplicity the most. It simply is a Magic card, with a strong core joke without any flashy elements in the way of the punchline. Moving along to Hellscube 7, we have Nuclear Bomb. Nuclear Bomb is a black sorcery that costs 3 generic and 2 black mana to cast, with each creature becomes a rad counter on its controller. So, if you're not familiar with radioactivity, I have a fun fact for you. When you try to record video or take a picture in a place with a lot of radiation, the particles cause a lot of fuzz or oversaturated pixels, leading to a sort of static effect. Thus, a nuclear bomb is quite crunchy on the pixel side. The flavor of just blasting the board into radiation is great, and I really like the implication with the art that the blast is just very distant. The firestorm not causing the board's demise, but the lingering radiation from the blast. So, in essence, this is a slam dunk on resonance. With innovation, this card definitely hits the novelty factor. Being a board wipe with a damaged mill rider is very interesting on its own, but the turning of creatures into counters comes with a lot of interesting implications. The cards are basically deleted from the game after the rad counters are removed. You see, those cards are no longer objects, so when removed from a player, they cease to exist, meaning no recursion, no death trigger, just turn into a counter irreversibly. What a cool way to represent death by atom bomb. Turning creatures into random things can happen a lot, and turning into a rad counter is a neat way to blank a creature card with minimal weirdness afterwards. Now, for grok ability, if you know what radiation does, you basically have the idea of how this card works. The theming does a lot of work in telling you the ultimate fate of these creatures. They're gone forever, atomized into radiation. Shout out to the noise filter on this, the thing that creates the static on it. It's easy to do too much and lose readability, but it's also easy to not do enough to get an appreciable visible difference. This sits right in the Goldilocks zone of visibility. Alright, before we get into the last main cube, I want to stop over at fan favorite, Hellscube. Hellscube was a small side project that modeled itself around Portal power level, a notoriously weak set of starter products that only had creatures, sorceries, and basic lands. Some of Portal 3 Kingdoms has some staples, but as a whole, the theme for Hex was for cards to be quite weak. That context out of the way, I want to talk about Syndrome. Syndrome is a 3/3 blue human villain legend that costs 2 generic and 1 blue mana to cast, with the effect of all creatures have shadow, all creatures have flying, all creatures have horsemanship. If you know anything about Pixar's Incredibles, you probably know Syndrome's goal in the film. Everyone can be super, and when everyone's super, no one will be. So the resonance here plays with Syndrome's plan in the film and the nature of evasion in MTG. So if all creatures have these evasive abilities, none of them are evasive. A great way to express what Syndrome does, especially in a lower power joke format. You see, themes like this are hard to do in normal main cubes, as part of the requirements of getting in are being usable and good in a draft environment. Syndrome, for all intents and purposes, is a blue 3-mana 3/3 that turns off most standard evasion, which isn't very good. But with Hexcube, you can tell your funny joke while still matching the power level. With innovation, I want to point out the frame break here. This is far from the first frame break, but this is one of the few frame breaks that accentuate the magic elements rather than cover them up or obfuscate them. The cost drifting a bit with Syndrome's forehead and the name scooting to the right to accommodate the Syndrome tech beam does a great job of adding a sense of dynamism to the very simple card. Playing with what a frame break means to a piece is a way to really deepen your design, giving it more pop and more chances to really wow a player thumbing through a pack. Lastly, with Grockability, this card follows the same suit on a lot of cards today. It's a simple layout that's undisturbed by wacky art elements. I think spreading out the line breaks helps sell the effect a bit more, and I think captures the sense of a villain monologue a bit. I think I could probably hear Syndrome saying these lines. That's at least my excuse for all the keywords being capitalized. Okay, and now for Hellscube 8, the currently in progress cube at time of recording. Today I'll be talking on quite the clean looking card, the Middleman. The Middleman is a legendary 2/3 human businessman creature that costs 1 generic and 1 white mana to cast with Mentor and Training. So, to lead, this card does something great with its presentation. A lot of cards start with a great idea, something diegetic like a pamphlet or a poster, but end up running into aspect ratio issues with their presentation. This card, for example, could have lived and died on just being a business card. Instead, it transforms just the rules and power and toughness box into a business card, setting it on a borderless art frame treatment with the name line and legend crowned. This gives the card a sense of cohesion and internal storytelling. Before the two businessmen shake hands, someone stops them. They must go through him first. And who is he? Oh, just your average human businessman with Mentor and Training. I will say the fantasy of the Middleman being legendary really pairs well with the stock image bar. Normally a stock image bar is a bit of a death knell for a card's humor these days, but this card leverages it well with the faceless creature somehow being quite legendary. Just a subversion of what people picture as legendary. Indeed, the Mentor and Training pull a lot of weight and resonance, being a succinct little pair of keywords that fit well in a business setting and on a powerful white creature. Now, for innovation, I mentioned the frame treatment and the resonance, but I have to call it out again as a very innovative way to put a smaller, horizontal-focused visual concept on a normally vertical card. More cards could use this technology of marrying art elements into a magic card, compromising between standard magic framing and non-standard framing to get a point across very well. Lastly, for Grockability, the business card has a great font size for readability, letting the relevant information take front and center, and the unique type line and PT box give a wonderful little visual edge to the card that lets all of the information be discrete and separate, but still married together aesthetically. The little symbol beside the keywords also helps delineate the abilities from the subtypes. This card is a great template to follow if you're looking to deviate from Magic style guides a bit. The separation of the elements really helps make this a easy to read card despite the visual changes to a normal card. Okay, and that's all the cubes I'll be talking about today. As before, I'm going to walk you through the steps I took to make a card that was accepted into the cube, in the same theme as today's talks. Today, I'll be talking you through Jace Learns. Jace Learns is a lesson instant that costs 2 blue mana to cast with put target spell into Jace the Mind Sculptor's spellbook. It's gone. So, the start of this card was thinking about the spellbook mechanic from Alchemy and Magic the Gathering Arena. This mechanic stores a bunch of cards that the base card can pull from and let you cast, let you put onto the battlefield, and so on. All usually a thematic assortment of cards. As I was thinking on the mechanic, of which I'm only tangentially familiar, I was wondering, I wonder if I could make a removal spell that puts a card in a spellbook. After toying with the idea for a bit, I decided that putting something in a spellbook and then being able to draft from that spellbook suffers from a couple of issues as a removal spell. To make it more than just a one-off removal spell that lets you copy the thing you removed, it would likely need to be repeatable. Repeatable removal needs to be either excessively slow or exceedingly expensive or limited, so I felt that was out. So I either had to make this a weird kill and copy, or I could just use a spellbook as a flavorful destination for the remove spell. Naturally, I then thought of who would be stuffing something into a spellbook only to never use it. That led me to Jace, which then led me to a counterspell variant. I wanted to keep it simple, so I chose flavor that let me avoid the complications of, wait, if it's in a spellbook, why can I never draft from it? Dissonance. To reinforce that, I added some flavor text to subtly hint that Jace just mind wiped his spellbook right after learning the spell, so it's gone forever, as he is wont to do. As I pointed this out before, frame breaks should be used in a way to accentuate the piece. Here, I took the Jace the Mind Sculptor art, got a reaching at the screen PNG, colored it blue, and then angled the hand to sort of cup the text. I felt it gave it some tangibility to Jace stealing the spell only to never use it, a sense that he is learning from Strixhaven and tutoring your spell as a lesson into his hand in his game. I think instilling a bit of motion and movement into the art can break up an otherwise text-dense joke, as the flavor text does dominate the rules box. Alright, and that's all I have today. Thanks so much for joining me, and I hope I can see you in the submissions channel of the Hellscube Discord.